give us some sense about where you think we are. Let's talk about the state of the union, and let's talk about the state of the unit, the family unit. So we want to cover both of those. We want to cover where we are as a country, where we are as a community, and what's happening at the family and individual level.
Okay. Well, here are my thoughts. I mean, one of the things that we're dealing with, and I'm working for Nasdaq, we obviously operate the markets. So we're seeing particularly what's happening. We operate markets both here in the United States as well as overseas in Europe. The market in itself is seeing, and you talked about starting from globally and coming back home. So the markets are obviously experiencing unprecedented message traffic, unprecedented volumes across all asset classes. Asset prices have been fluctuating, mostly in downward trend. The market has lost all of its gains over the past couple of years. It has gone as low as where certain prices were 3 years ago. And when you can think of that in terms of a market that has had its upward trend, that is a lot of loss in a short period of time. And like you said, I myself, was growing up as a young adult, working in Congress, working in local development corporations, through all those crises that you mentioned. This is the worst because of the fact that in most of those previous crises, it really focused on a particular asset class that tumbled and then had a trickle-down effect on the rest of the economy. But it's not as if the entire economy was infected at the same time. Because of the need for social distancing, this is affecting the entire economy all at one time. And additionally, it is affecting all countries at one time. So when you think of it in terms of a crisis like you might have when a particular area of the country, for instance, has a bad storm and power goes down, but then you have other utilities from outside of that area that will send help. We're in a situation where both nationally and globally, there's no one who can send help because everybody's in the same situation. And even though you may not have one of the areas that will have stronger effect, it's affecting everybody in one way or another in order to try to keep it from getting worse. So this is probably the first crisis I have seen in my lifetime where every aspect of the economy, I mean, obviously some worse than others, but every aspect of the economy is feeling the effect at the same time. We've often felt, people have a tendency to look at what has happened to them in their lifetime and feel that's what's always going to happen. Too often, because most of the wars in this country have been fought overseas. That even when we look at war, we look at it as, well, it's not that bad, because the U.S. has never experienced other than the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, and the Civil War, in the last century, we have not really experienced war on our shores and the destruction that comes with that. So you end up not believing or thinking you have to prepare for it in the same way that we have not really experienced since the Civil War political upheaval to the point where, like, that's taking place in Iraq and Syria and the like. And so I think this crisis ultimately can be good for us in two ways. One is acknowledging the realization that we are not invulnerable as a country. Nations, empires have risen and fallen before. It happened elsewhere. It can happen to us no matter how much money you have or weapons you have or so on and so forth. I'm a, God-fearing person as a Muslim, a believer, and Allah has shown us, well, all the weaponry that you have, I can take something that you can't even see, and bring you to your knees.
Hmm.
So this should be humbling for us. Two, one of the things that has happened in past crises is that those who could afford it and, various systems have become more resilient as a lesson from having to deal with particular crisis. My entire company and a lot of other companies that are still able to function are doing it without seeing each other, without, except on video, without seeing each other, without being in offices. In other words, we're able to do it without being on our normal real estate. And that was created by past crisis that said we have to have business continuity plans so that we can function. Even in a case like Hurricane Sandy, I'll give you an example. Hurricane Sandy in New York, there were broker-dealers that if they could not get to their offices, they could not serve their customers, so the markets had to be closed. Now that's not the case, and that was just 2 days. Now we're going into 3 weeks, and the markets are still functioning pretty much without flaw because we learned lessons from the past. Now that's on a larger scale, and that's happening in more developed countries worldwide. The question, and I want to bring it back to the local issue, is how do we develop that kind of resiliency in our neighborhoods and amongst our people? Now, what the Federal Reserve is trying to do, but they've used, as you know, after the 2008 financial crisis, they used a lot of their tools then, which is really, buying bonds, putting more money into the economy, lowering the interest rates so that hopefully people will want to invest more. But one of the things they said is that we used so much of it then, and it's become a normal part of the economy. And this is why Chair Powell was also looking at, we need to start raising interest rates because we keep them this low and that becomes the norm. Then when another crisis strikes, we won't be able to use that tool again because we're already pretty much at rock bottom. All right, we'll have to go to negative interest rates at that point in time. But what Congress is doing, as you know, is they're trying to put direct cash into the economy. They're trying to put it in the pockets of individual families. Of course, how long does $1,000, last, or $2,000, depending upon how they're going to distribute it. The agencies are still trying to figure that out, even though the legislation passed, because it was passed so quickly. A lot of the actual implementation has to be figured out by the agencies, by Treasury, by HUD, by others, by the SBA. And remember, all of those places, their people are working at home too. So we put this work on a government that's also struggling. It's not like, 9/11 where it's like, well, the government is still intact, and City Hall in New York is still there. Albany was still there. Now all those people that we're relying on are also home. And then the other question you have to deal with is for some of those businesses, particularly those that are, no work, no pay type businesses, some of our friends, and Jamal knows them and Kareem knows them, who own restaurants are struggling right now because people aren't out shopping. Macy's is laying off 130,000 people. So you may be able to help people with both forgivenesses in regards to mortgage payments, not forgiveness, but delays in mortgage payments and other things. But if they can't go out and spend that cash, it really doesn't help. One of the reasons we have this downturn is because those of us who do have cash aren't really out spending it because we've been told to stay away from, a lot of these places. And an economy is just like, use the same term, an ecosystem. It's dependent upon itself. Once one part begins to fail, then the other parts begin to fail too because it was all interdependent. So the question becomes, how soon are the steps that are being taken now going to give us an opportunity to reopen the economy? And the question becomes, both individually and from a community basis, how can we do like some of the larger players on a local level and become more resilient in a sense of we've learned from what has happened. So what do we do? As individuals, do we understand the importance of saving better? As small businesses, do they begin to say, if we can't open, how do we still get our product to market?